Hey, everybody. Happy Monday. Thanks for checking in to our latest Trade to Black podcast. I'm your host, Shad Dales. Hope you all got some rest from probably a late night last night as the Eagles pounded those Chiefs in the Super Bowl. Were you surprised? Well, I was not, as the Eagles clearly demonstrated they are the best team in the league. But forget all that stuff. Big show coming up here today. I know a lot of you reached out in the last 10, 12 days about what's going on, any updates regarding the ALJ hearing, and what we can expect next regarding the hearing itself. Well, guess what? Shane Pennington is going to hop on with us in just a moment, just to calm everybody. But before we get into that, managing expectations, there's been no updates since we last heard the news last month regarding the judge, John Mulrooney, indicating that the hearing would be delayed up to 90 days. So with that, we're going to get a clear understanding on the timeline as to what to expect next, as well as some interesting news regarding Pennsylvania and their governor and how it could be on the path to nowhere. I don't know if that's correct, but that's what one lawmaker is thinking right now in Pennsylvania. So Michael Bronstein is going to join us to talk more about that, to give us an update on how we should read into this regarding adult use cannabis. So with that, here on a Monday, let's welcome in AV.
How's it going?
I am good. How are you?
I'm good. Good. It was good to watch the game last night. Not hungover at all this morning. And it's Eagles won. Eagles did the job. They beat the Chiefs. Everyone's happy.
Yeah.
Except for Kansas City fans, but I feel like the whole country was on Philly.
Well, I did a recap last night during the halftime of the Super Bowl, and I talked about how cannabis sales actually go up 13 to 16% during the week of the Super Bowl. So maybe we're on to a new trend, as you say, that we're not hungover anymore. Maybe it's wings and weed, American tradition moving forward. But
that'd be something.
It's another incentive as to why cannabis might be a better choice. And I'm not condemn or basically encouraging people to go out and use, but it's a trend that we could maybe see in the future. But regardless, Here it is. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was going to say, I tweeted out this morning something like, congrats about not swapping alcohol for cannabis. And then somebody put on there, well, maybe congrats for not doing drugs or drinking alcohol and just watching the game. And I was like, that's a thought, which some of us probably need to think about.
Well, outside of this podcast, I want to bring up, you've actually very quietly gone about collecting 15 or 20,000 followers on Instagram. And it's because of the food that you make. And we've got Drew Dinkins and Ty Grower. Actually, we need the rib recipe, AV. The ribs looked good, right? It's Ty Grower and Drew Dinkins. Those ribs looked amazing.
If I gave you the recipe, I'd have to kill you. So it's about the extent of that.
You had those soaking in for like 48 to 72 hours. Is that right?
It's like 3 days. Yeah.
Nice. They look tasty. That's for sure.
They were good.
Yeah. So reason why we want to have this podcast here today, of course, it's every Monday at 4:00. But more importantly, I know a lot of people have reached out asking what's going on with the ALJ hearing, if there's been any updates. So with that, let's welcome in partner of Porter, Wright, Morris, and Arthur LLP, Shane Pennington, back to the podcast. Happy Monday. Good day, sir. How are you?
Great. How are you guys?
Good. You are representing Village Farms and Hemp for Victory in this ALJ hearing, as we've said in the past. And as I said off the top, we've had a lot of people reach out to us recently just asking as far as any updates. And as I said off the top again, there has been no updates, but we want to get a better understanding on just the overall timeline. So if there could be a ruling by the Trump administration now they're in the office, will this take 90 days? Is it up to 90 days? Like, what should we all be prepared for when it comes to, like, who should we hear from as far as further action regarding this hearing? Like, what should we be planning for as to what happens next?
So there are two sort of things that could happen. I guess there are really three that could happen, two that are far more likely than the third. The first is there are three actors, I guess is the way to frame this, that can do something about this right now. One is DEA, the acting DEA administrator, Maltz, could set the briefing schedule for the interlocutory appeal. So that's what Chief Judge Mulrooney set. When he granted the stay, he said, we're going to have an interlocutory appeal. The regulations say that the DEA administrator, which right now is Maltz, has to set the briefing schedule. So that would be, a briefing schedule comes out, says we file our brief on this date. DEA's counsel would file their brief on this date. DEA would make a decision on the interlocutory appeal. If that happened, we would then, it would depend on what the ruling was. What would happen after that. So I can dig deeper into that one later, but to stick to our higher level on our decision tree here, the other actor, if it's not the DEA administrator, you could have DOJ step in because it's a DOJ proposed rule. DOJ could say whatever it wants. It could say, we're going to set the briefing schedule. We're going to cancel the hearing and issue a final rule. We're going to start the hearing over. We're going to, I mean, it has a lot of control because it's DOJ, it's their rule. They can kind of do what they want.
Right.
And so, you know, then the third thing that could happen is Congress could do something, which sort of speaks for itself and is extraordinarily unlikely, I think. And so I'll just leave, but it's just technically there's another branch that could do something. And then, you know, just one other thing to throw out there, just so people have a full grasp of like everything that's in play. There are some lawsuits that are out there. Doctors for Drug Policy Reform have a case at the DC Circuit where the court denied a stay, and now there's a briefing schedule. And so in that case, court could potentially do something. That would probably take a little while, but could happen.
Yep.
And so now if we just take a step back and talk about where we are in the bigger picture, because this is important for people to understand. This interlocutory appeal really just has to do with the issues we raised in these two big motions that we filed, one back in November and another in, I think it was January 6th that we filed it. And basically what we did was we raised several concerns about DEA's role and actions in the administrative process. One,
right.
The ex parte communications, another that it's the proponent of the rule when it's a DOJ rule, and it's, you know, just sort of refusal to say whether it supports or opposes the rule. So we raised all those things. They're very troubling. We asked for relief. You know, long story short, that the chief ALJ said, look, I don't have authority to do much on these, but it doesn't matter because whatever kind of shenanigans are going on, they're not going to affect me, the unbiased ALJ.
Yeah.
Last time I was on here, I explained while I believe the ALJ is unbiased, the problem is that these issues go to who's in and who's out of the hearing, what evidence is in and out, who's going to get to cross-examine whom, and so forth. So it's more fundamental than that, and it affects the record. And so, you know, as much as I believe that he's unbiased, these are still very serious concerns.
Right.
And so if this interlocutory appeal, if it goes forward, would look at those issues, and DEA would be deciding should they do anything about those issues. If they did, let's say that they fixed it somehow. Let's just, you know, wave a magic wand and they fixed it. We would have to go through the hearing still. And then there would be a recommended decision that would then go to DEA or to DOJ, depending. And there would be then a final decision and then judicial review. So we would still have several steps to go before we got to a final effective decision. If, you know, DEA does nothing with it, then we're basically waiting for the Trump administration to do something, you know, to step in one way or the other. There's a date that the ALJ set that's the 90-day deadline to give a status update to him about like what's going on. And so, you know, if at that point DEA hasn't set a briefing schedule, then we would update the ALJ like nothing's happened. But that would obviously be, you know, something's wrong. Now, maybe the issue would be, well, it's a new administration. They, you know, it's taken us some time to get settled in or whatever. But we certainly hope that we have something that happens before then. And so last thing I'll say is if we went straight to a final rule, if DOJ were to step in and say, listen, we got a good enough record here. This hearing wasn't granted in good faith, obviously, because of all the shenanigans that have gone on. There's no need for a hearing because all the fact issues are resolved in the HHS recommendation, the OLC opinion, etc., the 43,000 comments. It's enough. Schedule 3. If that were to happen, then you would immediately go to judicial review. If anybody sought judicial review, which you have to assume someone would.
Right.
And so that is kind of where we stand and where things are.
So we saw the shenanigans that transpired with the DEA under the guise of Ann Milgram as administrator. Is there a possibility that, let's say, Maltz has some sort of mea culpa and acknowledges the circus that the DEA brought into the courthouse or the courtroom of the ALJ and says, look, we are a proponent of the rule. There is the HHS report. There is the OLC memo. Like, we need to reschedule cannabis. Not saying that he would, but there is a possibility that he could if he's given, let's say, marching orders from the Trump administration to just get this done and let's move on. We've got opioids, fentanyl, and the cartels that we need to focus on and really right the ship as it relates to our view of the cannabis industry.
Absolutely. I mean,
Okay.
that's what DEA should have been doing and could do.
I mean, yes.
And if the Trump administration wanted to get that done, it could do it any number of ways. It could do it having DEA, have a fair and transparent hearing, remedy the issues that have gone on, go through the hearing, and we would get a decision from the ALJ,
Right.
and then we would get a decision from either DEA or DOJ. Then we would have judicial review. As I said, another way is just to have it go straight to DOJ and have a final rule sort of straight away.
Yeah.
And I think they could do either one they wanted.
And it is I don't want to call worst case scenario, but it's going to be a pretty negative signal if the DEA does not file within the 90-day period as to that interlocutory appeal.
I mean, it would be mysterious.
Okay.
Like, why not? Now, maybe they're waiting
Correct.
to have an actual appointed Senate confirmed person at the helm of DEA for that. But without knowing what's going on internally, it's hard to say.
Yeah.
It certainly seems like a pretty simple thing to do to set a briefing schedule.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's your thoughts on malts? I know there's a lot of skepticism around the previous administration, the Ann Milgram, but first off, making it clear, he is the acting administrator, but has not been appointed as head of DEA. But is there the possibility he could be? And are you hearing any names, if not him?
I'm not. I mean, I hear, the same things you guys hear. I see things that there's a report that this guy was talking to the press about the President Trump's people talking to them and whatever. But I don't know anything that's not public. As far as malts, here's how I look at these things. You can think basically whatever you want about cannabis. And if you have a fair and transparent process, the record, the science, the evidence will dictate the outcome.
Yep.
And so I have no reason to think anything good or bad about malts. He's the current acting administrator. He's got a lot of experience in DEA before. I take people at face value and assume that they're going to be rational, fair actors until they show me otherwise. I will say that, I see a lot of people reading tea leaves, and looking at trying to divine what's going to happen based on a detail or a quote or something that some person said. And I would just say, for me, and I'm just talking about my own experience with this, because my expertise is the law and the nerdy procedure, really.
Yeah, of course.
I'm not an expert in the politics of it. But what I will say is I learned something from the last, 4 years of the Biden, Garland, Milgram administration and watching everybody, hang on their every word. And nobody was able to predict much of anything with much consistency or clarity. And so, I don't get too caught up in all of that. I think about this in the long term. And I've done that from the beginning, because that's there's a process that has to be followed, and there are lots of decision gates that we have to get through to get to the end of this. And ultimately, there's going to be it'll probably end up in court. And so that's how I think about it. I don't pay that much attention to the scuttlebutt.
Yeah, I get that. How's the I know there's not much internal information that you can share, but just speaking to Village Farms and how they're handling a lot of this ongoing process and what some of the feedback is pertaining to them, because I know there was a lot of questions and we addressed a lot of those questions as to what the approach is, but I'm assuming as time goes on, people are getting more educated and understanding this whole process had to make sense in the reasons why they did it in the first place. But any feedback pertaining to them?
I mean, yeah, I think that there was a little bit there, some people who didn't understand, their position. But I think, that has mostly been clarified. And if you look at, the long run or the short run, Village Farms has been at the very front of the pack in terms of pushing for Schedule 3. They're doing everything possible to get it done as quickly and fairly as possible to ensure that we have a record, et cetera.
Yeah.
They're doing everything right. And, part of what they're doing is they're putting themselves out there for critics, for sort of underinformed critics to snipe at them. And that's sort of the price you pay for going out and doing something that's difficult.
Yeah.
But they understand how important it is. And I'm frankly proud to be working with them and really like the people that I'm working with on a personal level.
Does the regulatory freeze that was implemented by the Trump administration have any bearing into this process right now, or that's kind of just it's there, and if we were to, let's say, go into a final ruling in the short term, it might have some bearing, but this process looks like it's going to be dragged out a little bit past that right now.
Yeah, I don't see anything that it immediately affects. And I've seen, I've talked with people about this online, and, you have to look at each situation on its own. So, maybe somebody has a hypothetical that I haven't considered yet, but at a basic level, I think that what the freeze said was, look, we want to make sure that our people, Trump's people, have a chance to review and sign off on anything that's going out. And if something's proposed, we want to make sure that it's not sneaking by the goalie here. And I don't see that really applying to anything having to do with rescheduling. Nothing that I've seen anyway.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we're in a situation now where it's just, as much as people want information and they want to hear something as to what's being developed, it's just the reality is that there's nothing there right now. And I know people don't like this in this industry, but you got to be patient. And I think that's the lasting message that people need to understand. But understanding what the next steps could be, but there's too many scenarios that we can come up with right now, and we don't really know what the next steps are necessarily going to be announced. So there's no need to speculate, right?
Right. And I mean, if I could just say something just to give people a little bit of good news, which is not news, but it's good. From the beginning, I've been saying that this was going to be a very long process. And I'm talking about October 2022. I've been saying it's November for sure. I'm pretty sure October. But in any event, people didn't like it then, and they don't like that now. But the fact is that this just is now you're seeing, I mean, people have seen it's a very long, very complex process. All the ways that people think that, you can skip and jump to the end. There are ways that it can be shortened in certain respects. And it has been actually gone pretty quickly in certain ways. But it is, at the end of the day, it's a long process. Here's the good part, though.
Okay.
We have run, if you think about it as a race with stages, right?
Yeah.
Where you're at the beginning, you got to get stage 1, stage 2, you have little pit stops or whatever. At each one, we have been winning. Not just a little bit,
but
we've been crushing. Like HHS giving us that analysis the way that it did, that was huge, historic. And it then the OLC, right? The OLC, and the fact that that was published and that we know what happened. It's resolved legal questions in a binding way. The fact that we had the public turn out in the way that they did, 43,000 public comments, signaling to everybody who's willing to look, including courts, executive branch, legislative branch officials, everybody, that this is important. People care. People, it matters. And those weren't all just like robot, repeat like you see in some very controversial rulemaking. These were people who put pen to paper and did this. Yeah. And that matters in the process. And, 95 plus, I can't even remember. It was some absurd number were, very, very high number were positive. If anything, they wanted more aggressive reform in general, which is what you would frankly expect. You have presidents from both political parties who have stated their public support of this measure. They're, everything that you can look at is going in our direction. There's only one little problem, and that is DEA. And DEA and a particular group of people from the past administration showed us that they did not want this to happen, and they were willing to break the law to make sure that it didn't. And the people on the other side, and this is what happens, right? When you look at it, we just had the Super Bowl. When it's getting down to the wire and you've been beaten in 3 quarters pretty pretty soundly, and you've only got one quarter to make up whatever it is, however many touchdowns, you start to get desperate. That's when people do desperate things. And I know that doesn't help everybody when at the end of the day, the message still is we're in a holding pattern. I get that. But if you could just take a step back for a second and realize we're in a holding pattern, but we're winning.
Yes.
And we have a great record, and it's going to matter. Look, 20 years from now, nobody will be impatient about this anymore. And this record will be here, and it will matter then, just like the record in the normal proceedings mattered. So,
Shane,
for what it's worth, we've come a long way, and we're on the right track, believe it or not.
Yeah, you focus on the law, but I have to ask you, when you're presenting in this case, do you feel better at all with this new administration now in office compared to what we had before? Or is it too tough really to answer that question? There's too many unknowns.
I will say this. I almost want to knock on wood here, but we know what we had before, which was a corrupt agency that was going to block the door no matter what. And they're going to do everything they could to prevent us from succeeding. And they were going to, do it dirty. And so having anyone else in seems like it's almost got to be better, right? Because, what are the chances that we're going to get 2 in a row administrations that are so opposed to something that's so popular and are willing to actually, because all they have to do, if they just follow the law, I believe that we win on the merits in the end. And so that makes me feel better, but it's nothing about the Trump administration in particular, that I know that everybody else doesn't, or it's not that I heard them say this one thing on the campaign trail or whatever.
I hear you.
Because we had all those good signals from Biden's people, back when as well. What it is that I just believe, look, if the Biden administration wasn't going to do it for us because of DEA, they weren't going to do it for us. There's nothing that I, as a lawyer, I'm not Harry Potter, I can't conjure things out of a hat or something. And if the Trump administration doesn't want it to happen, then that makes it very tough for me too, with just a pen and paper and a law degree. But we know what they said, and we know that the record is so solid. And so I believe if we can just get a fair shot, we're going to ultimately succeed. I think in the long run, to me, another good kind of analogy for this is if you think about something that's this popular, it's sort of like gay marriage. It's a controversial issue. People have views about it. I understand. But it's so popular at a certain point, so much tax money is being driven by the policy, which side you're on, that it's just a matter of time. And so I feel good in the end, and I feel good that we have sort of a new referee in, or a new decision maker, set of decision makers in, because it can't be as bad. Any change would be better than what we had before, which was just total lawlessness trying to block us.
I hate to read the tea leaves trying to make predictions, but I don't know if you saw, but Ricketts and Lankford filed a bill that would say that despite rescheduling to Schedule 3, cannabis companies would still have to pay 280E. So if you're thinking about it logically, either they have absolutely nothing to do with their time, or they think something is going to get changed and they're trying to thwart progress. Because I don't understand, looking at things logically, which I'd like to do, why you would file a bill to nullify changes that haven't been made yet.
To the
scheduling process.
That happens a lot. So here's the thing. That happened with the research bill back in the day. I won't go through all the details, but they had a research bill supposed to make research easier. And then it ended up doing something where even if cannabis were moved to Schedule 3, the research restrictions from Schedule 1 would still apply because it made it agnostic to scheduling. So this is straight from the playbook. And this is why people need to. We were talking offline, or maybe it was before, I can't remember, but about how absurd and perplexing the cannabis situation is. And I think part of it is, to most of us who are in this, it's like, this is obvious. It's the only rational outcome. For God's sakes, what's going on? It's popular. It's bipartisan. Like, can we please just move on with our lives? That's not enough, obviously.
I know. Obviously.
So we have to, and that's why I mentioned Congress, actually, Anthony. That's why I mentioned it in my 3 decision makers who could potentially change this. because Congress you have to stand guard at every exit, every place of vulnerability. We have to be vigilant, and we can't ever let our guard down. And as people get tired, that's the game plan, right? The game plan for the other side is to turn people against Village Farms, right? Have us bickering with each other, so we're not talking about DEA's corruption, right? And then it's to like, okay, while they're watching the administrative process, weasel something in through Congress. I mean, the enemies of cannabis are really good at keeping our head under the water, and we just cannot stop fighting at this point.
Yeah. Blur the outcome and have us fighting amongst ourselves. But listen, I know there's not a lot to talk about right now, but I really appreciate you coming on here today and just clarifying and be that calming voice, because I know, and there's a couple of people mentioning here today, they're just frustrated that this is taking long, but welcome to cannabis. This is all about it, but this is part of the journey. But listen, I know not the easiest interview to be asking you for all these answers when there's all these hypotheticals, but again, appreciate you taking the time and providing any information you can now. And hopefully we hear something soon, but in the meantime, let's keep in touch. Okay.
Thanks very much, guys. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, Shane. Definitely somebody, I hope people got something out of that, which I think they did. And, you know, like I said, you and I could be sitting here like, if there's a ruling, like there's no sense in speculating. But I think if anything, he just kind of drummed things up as to who's at play here and what can we expect next. So hopefully people got out of that.
I think that segment was responsible reporting.
Yes.
Fair, balanced, and objective conversation about what's going on, not what could happen.
Yes.
What is happening and what could potentially happen in the future.
Yeah.
Without any sort of sensationalizing or quotes from mysterious sources, staffers, or associates of agencies.
We're not on the Cole memo. Thank you very much. Give us smash that.
I forgot to ask him because I know Shane quoted, I think it was Bun B or Pimp C in the last segment that he was on with us a couple weeks back. I was going to ask him if he saw the halftime report. I mean, the halftime show of the Super Bowl last night.
We live in interesting times, that's for sure. But we can save that conversation for another day. Anyways, that wraps up segment 1 here on the Traded Black podcast. Now time for segment number 2. All right, now time for segment number 2. Hope you like that intro, sir. But welcome back, Michael Bronstein. He's the president of ATACH, the American Trade Association for Cannabis and Hemp. Happy Monday. Good to see you.
Happy Monday. It's a great day. Eagles win the Super Bowl.
Oh, you would
I forgot you're a Philly guy. I forgot you're a Philly guy.
I mean,
congratulations. I literally was sitting on my couch last night thinking to myself, man, this would be really nice if it was the Dolphins. Just be really nice if it was the Dolphins. But no, I'm happy. Love Hurts, Saquon. Team was unbelievable.
I'm going to say there were exactly 2 days in my life where I woke up the next day where the Eagles had won the Super Bowl. This is one of them. Okay. So there are only so many days that it gets. And I'm sure that, Miami would have a heck of a parade. Here it'll probably get a little violent. But
yeah.
All the more enjoyable, I suppose.
Yeah.
Forget the final score. Who did Hurts hit on that bomb that made it 34-0?
Devontae Smith.
It was 34-0. I read a stat, Michael, at halftime. The Eagles had 24 points and the Chiefs have 23 yards of total offense. And I was like, this game is over. Like, this is not a comeback. I'm sorry, but you're not holding up against that defensive line. It was a ass whipping at its finest.
I don't know how many people expected that, but it was really an unbelievable game. And I feel sorry for the rest of the country that basically had to turn it off in the third quarter.
Yeah. It reminds me a lot of growing up in the 80s and early 90s. You turned the Super Bowl off after like the first quarter. There were blowouts. The NFC won 13 years in a row. And I think the average win by 20 points or more. It was brutal back then. But listen, I wanted to have you back on. I don't know if you got a chance to listen to some of our conversation regarding the rescheduling. So we're talking about a lot of reform things. And there was some news that came out of Pennsylvania last week involving Republican Senator Dan Laughlin. He's long been an advocate for legalization and sponsoring bipartisan bills to end prohibition. He said on Wednesday last week that the Governor Josh Shapiro's budget proposal enact the policy change is fundamentally flawed, is what he outlined, and has no real path forward. So what's the latest here, and what should we believe, or who should we believe at this point? Because Governor Shapiro has talked about, tax revenue and the opportunities and residents crossing state lines and going to neighboring states. But does he have a point here? Like, is there really a plan in place from the governor? Should there be any concerns related to adult use being passed later this year?
To me, what I saw this was really the starting gun of negotiations. And I think that people who are involved in politics in the state read that line a bit differently, I think, than folks who maybe are just looking at it from the outside. Because to me, what Laughlin was saying is pretty much exactly, he's not going to accept the governor's proposal hook, line, and sinker, right? Like, he is the Republican senator, and he is looking to ensure that it is his bill that crosses the finish line when it comes to legalization, right? And there's historical context here. We're going into a budget negotiation, and what you're going to have is the Republican Senate really rattling the cage, saying, hey, governor, you've got to come to the table, because they're going to want something for legalization, right? So there's really two revenue items that are on the table right now: skill games, right, and marijuana legalization.
I brought up that term skill game last week. I think we had about 8 comments in like a matter of 20 seconds. Like, what is that? But that is wild what you're explaining to me about. And anyways, finish your thought.
Yeah.
And that's that is a thing. I mean, the way that Pennsylvania budgets get negotiated, it's not like the governor comes out with a line item on a policy, especially when there's a party that disagrees on it, and then all of a sudden everyone's like, that's right. Yeah, he said it. We're going to do it. Right? Why would Republican leadership have an incentive to do that? Right? Here's the thing that I'm listening for as somebody involved in politics, right? If Republican leadership came out and said, there's no way we're doing it in this budget, right? If they said, you know what, socially, this state isn't ready for this, it's just not the time, right? Those are things that we heard in the past. We're not hearing that right now. What we're hearing from Republicans is,
good point. It's a good point.
We don't like the way that it's proposed. Okay. And to be sure, the industry right now, writ large, there are a lot of concerns, right? There are concerns about the licensing fees that were proposed around the budget, around the budget negotiations. There were a lot of concerns about that. And the point is, in Pennsylvania, the way the process works, at least the way with every other budget item that works, forget that it's, cannabis that we're talking about here for a second, is if governor believes X, right, legislature believes Y of different party, right, one's going to come out with something, the other's going to malign it, right, and they're going to negotiate in public until they sit at a table with each other and say, okay, this is how we're going to do it. So, I think the governor really made a very forceful pitch for legalization.
He did.
And what they're saying is, hey, you got to come to the table. If you want that, you got to come to the table on this.
And for context, for those that don't know, Senator Laughlin was working last year with Democratic Senator Street on a bill regarding Pennsylvania legislation, correct? He's reached over to the other side of the aisle. He's willing to play ball. This truly is, from an optics perspective, political posturing as far as his statements go.
I think also that he can't be, remember, I don't think that Republicans right now can show that they're on the same page as Shapiro on any issue coming into the budget. Right? Why would you do that as a political, why would you do that coming into a budget process, especially when you're when you're actually trying to negotiate? So to me, I think that there's a lot that has to play out around that. And when I sort of saw what he was saying, the other thing reading in between the lines is, I think that Senator Laughlin and Senator Street, are very interested in making sure that the bill that passes, okay, or the policy that passes is close to what they want.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's what they have, like, that's sort of what you have to do in the negotiating process. So to me, I saw those comments and I felt that, hey, like, look at what the senator said. Like, he was saying, he's taxing it too high, right?
Yeah.
26% effective tax rate's not only excessive, but it's counterproductive.
You
right?
make a very good point, though. If they're questioning his approach on all this, it's more or less saying, let's talk for negotiation. You can always tell when a conversation is going to be shut down when basically a party says, we have no interest to talk about this at this given time. And that's encouraging when you factor in how much of those conversations in different states we continue to hear, including in Washington, D.C. Something that you and I actually touched on with Brady last week, Anthony, but that's encouraging.
So as far as,
I mean, he's talking about how a tax rate that high only drive consumers to the black market, right? That's a Republican senator saying that for legalization, right?
Yeah.
And then he's saying we need a plan that competes with illicit sellers. He's talking about a plan.
Yeah, he is.
That has to be implemented. He's not saying, "Oh, let's walk away from the table here." And Senator Laughlin has been a champion.
Yeah, sounds like it when you read his credentials.
So I think, look, and he went further. He said that he's going to continue to work on both sides of the aisle, right? So literally try to get to a bipartisan approach for cannabis policy that works. So, I mean, to me, I think that was a tell as to where they're going. If you watch this process, okay, and it stalls, the way that you will be able to know that happening is because people will say this policy can't do this, or this policy isn't going to happen, or like, look at what Republicans said previously in this state where they're like, we have social issues with this problem, right? Two months ago.
Yeah.
2 years ago, right? That's what.
So then as far as the process goes, we've heard a very compelling statement, a series of very compelling statements from Governor Shapiro. We've now had Senator Laughlin come out at face value and say there's no path forward. So that's been cleared up. Procedurally, what's next, or what are you looking at next to transpire in the state of Pennsylvania as it relates to the conversation? Because I'm assuming there's going to be a back and forth and now a process that's going to take place to kind of streamline this and really come to an agreement as to what adult use will look like in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I think what we are watching is what people are saying publicly, but not just what they're saying publicly, but what they're doing privately.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right? Are these conversations going on behind closed doors?
Which you think they are?
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a discussion. There's more. I was in the legislature last week, right, when they were in session. There's more of a discussion around adult use legalization than I have ever heard.
Interesting.
Okay.
People are talking about not if, they're talking about how, right? Like, that's what they're talking about.
And that's what you want to hear. That's what you want to hear.
That's
right?
what you want to hear. Now, and to be sure, right? Could something go, could things go wrong? Could that, yeah,
Of course.
Sure. It's a budget. I mean, that happens in budgets, right? But the point is that this is front and center. We had people come up to us after Shapiro, right? I was walking around in the rotunda, and somebody came up to me and they said, this budget basically was about marijuana legalization. They're like, you look at it, skills, marijuana legalization, energy, right? So I think what people are talking about here in state is advancing a conversation forward. And I would say that around legalization in the legislature, yes, there's been hearings previously. Yes, there have been things happening, but it's really the first time that you're hearing, I think, this level of activity.
Is there a timeline? Is there a timeline that they have to get this budget done, or are these ongoing conversations?
So the budget timeline is a June 30th timeline in Pennsylvania. Now, here's the thing.
Okay.
Sometimes budgets run over, and sometimes budgets in off-year elections run over, and you could be negotiating into July, right? Like those types of things can happen. The Pennsylvania legislature is a full-time legislature. So this isn't one of those things where it's like, okay, like they can negotiate until they get to a deal.
Yeah.
So, does it? Yeah. Like I think though, right now everybody is looking at June and figuring out their moves of how they get to the budget negotiation table.
One thing that's going to grab a lot of people's attention is $1.3 billion in tax revenue over the next 5 years if legalization kicks in by July, and if sales were to start in January of 2026, which was reported. That, like, I don't know how you walk away from something like that, especially in a state like Pennsylvania. No,
the numbers in the budget don't work over the next several years unless you pass cannabis legalization, right? So this is very different. Like it's actually very different, right? We're actually looking at numbers in a budget that on a go forward basis, Pennsylvania will need to have revenue in order to run some of these programs that are counted on. So that to me is a very clear and telling tell.
Yes.
On sort of what we're looking at.
Now, is that the messaging? Is that the core of the messaging internally to get these conversations revved up and going? It's fiscally, we are going to need this revenue, and the revenue is there. We have our constituents going out of state right now, hand over fist, to all of the adult use markets that are surrounding us, and we're not taking advantage of this right now. We need to be.
I'll tell you this. I think when people inside the legislature see the numbers and they're working on appropriations and they've been hammering this stuff around the budget, nobody needs to be told that because they all know implicitly that that's what's going on, right? Like in any budget, when when you see that, what it is that you are taking out it from, from a political and policy perspective. So that to me is like, people who are working on the budget in the legislature, like they know that. They read it, they look at the numbers, they're like, all right, this is how they add up, this is how they don't add up.
Michael, I want to get to a question from one of our viewers. Constructive Economics writes, what you guys are forgetting is you've got a whole host of GOP leadership that are beholden to law enforcement and big pharma. How do you get these two to support legalization? Is that person reading this completely wrong?
No, I think that there has to be more work, right, amongst Republicans in the state, right? There has to be more work. There has to be work, I think, on the Senate side of this, where there be additional Republicans to add to the mix in the Senate on this. And Pennsylvania, it's going to have to be bipartisan passage of legislation. Yeah. Pennsylvania is one of the few legislatures in the country where it has a Republican Senate, a Democrat House, so split, right? And then on the House side, there's only one vote that separates the majority Democrats between the minority Republicans, okay? And you have a Democratic governor. So it's really what you're going to see here is the product of a bipartisan bill. It's going to have to be on some level in order to get this across. And I'll tell you something, you're going to get better legislation with bipartisan legislation in Pennsylvania than you will if it would have just been one party or another on this.
That's a good way of looking at it. Never thought of it that way. All right. I also wanted to bring up, there's welcoming news involving a Republican lawmaker who's hopeful that Congress will be able to get a marijuana bill across the finish line this session. As at a hearing at the House Financial Services Committee last week, Republican Warren Davidson out of Ohio, he raised the cannabis banking issue as members discussed broader concerns about claims of discriminatory debanking practices with financial institutions. And this coming off, obviously, since we spoke to you last, there was the Senate banking hearing, which took place. Did you get a chance to see that hearing at all? And when you hear people like Republican Warren Davidson, along with the conversation being brought up with crypto last week, it's good that this continues to be talked about and it's becoming more and more of attention. And what was your thoughts, on that hearing itself?
It was very good that cannabis banking was brought up. The other thing that you sort of see around this, if you're dealing with anti-money laundering issues and you're dealing with debanking, right? Who is more debanked right now than the cannabis industry that people aren't no one. And by the way, like, it's normal. Like, it is accepted right now in the industry about how hard it is to actually do business, or to just be getting thrown out of banks, right? And then having to, find a bank that is that will service a cannabis client on this. Okay. So to be sure, there are other industries that are debanked, but what industry is more, illustrates this problem more than what cannabis is? And I'll tell you something, when safe banking, after we had the hearing last year on safe banking, right? One of the reasons why you saw all these other issues come in to that discussion was precisely because there are other issues around debanking. Okay. And cannabis is like such a big issue on cannabis debanking that if you're dealing with debanking in general, safe kind of got, seen through those lenses.
Yeah, it was.
And so it's probably the first time that cannabis has really made its way into, from a congressional standpoint, into like a mainstream legislative, I'll put in air quotes, mainstream legislative discussion.
I agree.
Around a broader issue.
I think the light went off last week where the standalone of safe banking passing regarding cannabis, those days are over. It's going to latch on, as Anthony's been bringing up a number of times the last couple of weeks, related to crypto. And what better, environment to have both of those industries brought up at a banking hearing revolving the Senate. I thought it was perfect timing. So let's see what happens next. What were you going to say, Anthony?
Yes. So I saw Senator Lummis, I think, filed a revised bill. The definition under it is federally legal businesses as it relates to debanking. So we've got a ways to go.
Yeah.
We've got a ways to interject ourselves into the conversation. And I do remain net positive that it does get rectified at some point in time. But yeah, right now that federally legal definition seems to be following us everywhere in the debanking conversation.
Good point.
I'll tell you something. One of our problems as an industry too, that we need to fix on a congressional basis, is the idea that that people think that if they vote for something like this, it's a legalization by abstention bill.
Correct.
Right.
So they think about that. They think that about rescheduling as well. Right now. Yeah.
Right. Which, by the way, the country is for all of these.
Correct.
Right. It happens to be that, we live in the type of world where we have a representative democracy, and the people who are representing people right now are not doing such a good job in coming around to the views of their electorate. And look, I don't blame Congress on this. You've heard me say this before. That's our fault. Okay. We have to fix the way that Congress is thinking about this.
Correct.
All right? We have to. All right. It is our job to do this. It has been a failure, I think, up to this point, in terms of how those discussions have gone. There needs to be more outreach on it. And that's the only way really to get, get success. And I think there needs to be more strategy too.
Agreed.
Yeah. Anything catching your eye in particular right now that you're focused on outside of, let's say, the PA legislature, Ohio? I know we had some news in Hawaii that they're shelving the legislation there. Anything interesting that you're seeing around the industry?
I think we're seeing a lot of intoxicating hemp legislation pop up in a number of different states. I think that when we see, like, if you really look at where where folks are focusing on right now, it's how do we deal with regulation on this. There's a lot going on, discussions in Texas and Florida, and in some of these other legislative sessions that we see, coming up, where they're going to have to be decisions made. We just saw Missouri. There was another bill that was introduced in Missouri on this. And I think that people are really trying to deal with the challenges of what happens when you basically have a flood of these synthetic products or, THCA flower that's happening outside of an unlicensed, unregulated system. And this has been a constant over the last couple of years. But if there is an issue that is animating state legislators more right now, you tell me what that is. I mean, we're watching these things in all these different states. We obviously have a national council of state organizations. We have state level lobbying that's going on. And this is a constant feature that we're seeing in a number of different markets.
So as it relates to hemp, and this might actually go down the rabbit hole in a very long conversation, but we see these bills. I've seen these bills, plenty of them. All I see are filing bills and people talking about enforcing the law as it relates to hemp. How do they actually plan to enforce any of these laws? Because if you're looking at it logically, the hemp industry is very large. They're very sophisticated. Like in Florida, for instance, if they did a ban like what Joe Gruters was attempting to file in his bill, or there's another overarching bill that comes from DeSantis' desk, I know for a fact there's very large, sophisticated vertical operations in the state of Florida that produce hemp, sell hemp, distribute hemp. It's in every gas station. It's in every corner store. It seems like quite a daunting task to regulate it out of existence. That seems like it's going to take even more time and resources versus just legalizing it and saying the market will figure it out on its own.
We've seen different states react in different ways. We saw, California issue an executive order, right? We saw Missouri try to do a similar thing along those lines, right? We watched an Illinois battle go on in the legislature. I mean, here's the thing: enforcement. So it's interesting. If you look at this industry and you talk about regulation and you talk about enforcement, they're different sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
Alcohol enforcement coming out of prohibition was interesting because you went through a period where you had prohibition, you had enforcement. Okay, there was some non-enforcement there too. And then when you move to a system of regulation, basically what you had is regulation and enforcement on the two sides of the same coin, right? What you will see, in my view, is you'll see resources that start to get dedicated to the regulation of the marketplace, whether it be, and it depends on in different states where those resources are going to come from, right? We're going to see some states where it's like, okay, we know that people who are making synthetic products, that under enforcement actions, there might be some streams of how enforcement is going to be done and where they get budget out of it. But ultimately, legislation that happens when you get to regulation, the enforcement stream is going to have to line up with it. And I think that in the next round of this discussion, that's what we're likely to see. And in the cannabis industry, what we're going to find going forward, it's going to be interesting. Because you have folks who went from not being regulated, right? So look at the gaming industry as a great example of that, right?
Yeah.
Or the online, DraftKings and FanDuel, right? On those types of things, right? It went from, all right, we're enforcing against a market to now we're actually enforcing what those laws on the books look like. It's going to take a little while in the cannabis industry. But that's what we're going to see. And I think look, we're talking about the hemp industry, right? I think there's a large question about, is the synthetic THC industry really the hemp industry?
Right.
So I think this question is still out there.
Unfortunately, I would have to say it is, as the products are derivatives of hemp for the most part. But at the same time, is it what the hemp industry should look like? No, I don't think so at all. I think you should have low dose products that are naturally derived D9 products in beverage, gummy, and some other formats. And THCA flower, I mean, this isn't a popular opinion, but THCA flower probably should get relegated into the traditional state-run cannabis model channels versus the channels that you're having it right now, which is just completely accessible and nowhere near as stringent as the state-run model in terms of accessibility.
We will talk more about this next Monday, but I always appreciate you checking in. Congrats on your Eagles. This has been Insider's Edge, presented by the American Trade Association for Cannabis and Hemp. Michael Bronstein, keep in touch. We'll see you next Monday.
Great to see you guys. Thanks for having me.
See you next week.
Good conversation. Gotten a lot of great feedback. We will ask the question, but if you guys want to get a better understanding, I know Ty Grower, you asked if whether or not Attach has worked with USCR. Check out the video from last Monday. Michael explains that into great detail and explains the difference between what their initiative is in comparison to what the United States Cannabis Roundtable, USCR, is doing. But check that out from last Monday's live stream. That would have been dated February the 3rd, that you can find on our Trade to Black playlist on our channel right here. But we got earnings coming up tomorrow. Organigram, Vina Goldenberg is going to be on the podcast on Wednesday to go over details. Nice. And we're going to have an interview, actually pre-record, that we're doing with Aras Azadian again from Avicanna tomorrow morning. We're going to post that later this week. They had some interesting news regarding big tobacco. Philip Morris with that announcement from last week, or I should say last month. So we'll get more into details and what that all means. And then we're also reaching out to Eric Berlin from Denton's, hopefully to have him on later this week, potentially Friday. And in the event, I know we touched on it with Shane, if we could get an official ruling versus the hearing being dragged out with regards to rescheduling, how does that happen? What would that look like? And we will speak more about that with Eric later this week, hopefully on Friday, but we'll confirm that in the next day or two. But anything else you want to add?
I'm good.
Good?
I'm good.
Yeah, it was a good show. I thought Shane was great. I thought Michael was great. I know it's kind of a slower day as to...
It was a decent amount of news. I mean, you had the Tilray news. We got OGI tomorrow. There's some stuff moving on the states. Pennsylvania, there was also some federal court appeals, I think, as far as gun laws go. So, I mean, it's moving and shaking. It's just a slog. I mean, the capital markets are chopping. Everybody's back to the forefront with some conspiracy theories around the ETFs. There's just a bunch of shit circling.
Yeah,
just kind of rolling with the punches and just keeping everything straight.
Salt Coast Fishing writes opinions on CGC. Look, the focus, as we've said before, is going to be Canopy USA, and that's still status quo at the moment right now. But they did drop their operating costs, but there's real legit questions there with regards to some of the revenue being down. But Luc Maggio, their new CEO, we have reached out, and like I said, probably next week he's going to come on. So we'll get an introduction of who he is. I know he was approached by the board, has been involved with CGC, I think, for like 2 years based on the earnings call that they took place. But we reached out to the team, and we're hoping to get them on next week. But yeah, there's some real legit questions, and people are going to obviously have to monitor that accordingly moving forward.
Could be worse. Could be Patrick Mahomes today. If I could trade with Patrick Mahomes and have a $500 million NFL contract, I would take the ass whipping he took last night any day of the week. So I don't know about that, Gord.
Yeah, you think about it. You got your ass whipped. You deal with the media. You have your exit interviews, and then you're on a private Learjet to like the Maldives.
The man's never had a season end that wasn't in the Super Bowl or the AFC Championship. He's doing okay. They got beat by a formidable opponent, embarrassed to a certain extent. He's Patrick Mahomes. I mean, his legacy's not changed.
Yeah.
Like, he's still Patrick fucking Mahomes at the end of the day. He'll be fine.
Those guys, the next 30 to 60 days, they just go missing. Like, they will not be heard of.
I'd check out and go on vacation.
Totally.
You wouldn't hear from me for a month.
At least, if not more.
Yeah. But no, Patrick Mahomes will be fine. Last night doesn't change a single thing. He'll probably be in the Super Bowl next year again.
Yeah. Well, one thing that keeps continuing to move.
Not my Dolphins.
There's this pending news about RFK with the HHS, but that psychedelic ETF, PSIL, continues to move. I don't know what it closed at, but there is some pending news pertaining to that I think is helping it move a little bit here over the last couple of days. But like I always say, don't fall asleep as we on the psychedelic space. And as I said last week, we kicked off a new weekly segment. So we're going to have, like I said, anyone from analysts to different veterans and executives on within the psychedelic space. We're going to do that segment each and every week for about 15 minutes every Wednesday on our live stream. But
PSIL is up 5.5%.
5.5.
Yeah.
All right. David Benz writes, any news on the boys case? Actually, we should reach out to Emily and Jason regarding that. Great question.
I'll ask Jason. I haven't talked to Jason. I talked to Jason last week, but they didn't come up.
Yep. Check out my video from last night, a recap of the week, where I highlighted Aurora, who basically headlined the biggest developments last week. And why wouldn't they? Those were some great numbers, weren't they?
From who? I wasn't listening. I was reading the comments.
Aurora.
Oh, yeah. Stock getting some follow through.
Yep. All right, sir. I won't keep you as usual, people. If you want to get an idea as what we're teeing up for Organigram's latest earnings, make sure to scan that QR code, log on to the dalesreport.com and subscribe to our Baked In newsletter. We'll give our full analysis later this week on what we thought of Aurora's latest earnings. And you can do so by, like I said, subscribing and becoming a Baked In newsletter subscriber delivered to your
Jason
mailbox.
Wild is apparently watching the show. They're still waiting on an appeals court decision. So there you go, in real time. Thank you, Jason.
Gotta love the audience that's watching.
Yeah.
Okay. As I said, become a subscriber. Smash that bell for all notifications. Give this video a like and share it with your network. Honestly, people, please give this video a like if you liked it. And as usual, always love hearing back from you. So leave some comments and I will make sure to respond later this evening. In the meantime, everybody enjoy the rest of your day and we'll see you back here Wednesday at 4 o'clock.
See you guys.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. Stay connected here. The latest Traded Black podcast. Another great episode under the belt. What'd y'all think? Do you like what we had to say? Please leave any comments below. And as usual, make sure to subscribe to our Baked In newsletter. Check us out on Apple and Spotify. And if you haven't done so already, make sure to smash that like button, leave some comments, as I said before, and subscribe to our channel because we wouldn't be here without you. Thanks again, everybody, for watching.